Shabbat Shalom. I was working with the religious school students on Wednesday. They are learning parts of the service a little bit at a time. And when they've completed all of the blessings in that service, they come into the sanctuary and the rabbi leads them through it. It should have been a very simple 10-minute exercise, except that when we got to the prayer, Elohai Nishama, the prayer about God giving each human being a pure soul, they had a lot of questions. What's a soul? What makes it pure? What happens to the soul after it dies? You know, these are the questions that humanity has been asking that give meaning to our culture for thousands of years. And the Talmud tells us in Chagiga 11b, as for him who considers these things, in other words, these big cosmic questions, it would be better for him if he had never come into the world. And what are the questions one should not ask? What is above, meaning in the heavens? What is below? You get that one. What came before, meaning before creation? And what will come after, meaning after there is no more world? These are the questions that we long to ask. These were the questions that kept us in the sanctuary for 45 minutes instead of 10. And they're young, they're asking these questions already. And that is precisely what this week's Parsha sets out to help explain. One of the reasons that I find this the most difficult Parsha upon which to sermonize is every word is only on the surface. And if you analyze underneath, every bit of this Parsha is trying to answer those most important questions in the human soul. So I'll give you an example this morning. I will use the 3 kinds of water found in this story, but that's arbitrary. I could have used the word light and answered so many questions. I could have used the word good or fruit or tree, and we would have had a similar exercise trying to understand God and the cosmos. So let's begin with water. The first image of water is in the 2nd sentence of the Torah. And we're told, now the earth was unformed and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. These are primordial waters, and if you look through the commentaries on this kind of proto, not yet world been created kind of water, it's a message about the essential nature of God. Rashi does it very simply. He says, those were the waters covering the land. Those are the waters called tohu vavohu, chaos. Those are the waters that God separated so that we could have dry land. He makes it very simple. And I get this image of Julie Andrews and Mary Poppins, the Disney movie, in the nursery as she's tidying up and she snaps things into place and they all go where they're supposed to be. But Psalm 74 tells the story in a more dramatic way and is actually in line with many Near Eastern ancient myths. They all have this image of God needing to beat back chaos as an actual entity or demon in order to create space and order for creation to come into being. So here's just a little bit of Psalm 74. It was you who split open the sea by your power. You broke the heads of the monster in the waters. It was you who crushed the heads of the Leviathan and gave it as food to the creatures of desert. It was you who opened up springs and streams. You dried up every flowing river. The day is yours, and yours also the night. You established the sun and the moon. It was you who set all the boundaries of the earth. In other words, God is almost this epic hero, and one of God's duties, one of the things that God does, is he makes order from chaos. That in order to create creation, he had to create boundaries, and in order to perpetuate creation, God has to keep everything in its place. Then there are the mystical readings of this primordial water. The Zohar tells us that God used a cold northern wind to congeal the tohu vavohu, the chaotic waters. He froze them into place, and then he said, Now I can create. Now I've made a space. In the Zohar, the northern wind is symbolic for the Sphira of Din. A Sphira is an emanation from the infinite that gets expressed in the finite world so that we are able to relate to the one who is endless and immeasurable. Sphirot are somewhat like Plato's forms in Greek philosophy, if that helps anyone. So the Sphira of Din, the emanation of judgment, is not, oh, I'm judging you for making a bad decision. It's not being judgmental. It means I can discern. Part of the way God brought the world into being was to have discernment about where to put things and how to keep them separate so that we could operate on some kind of system and not in chaos. That's water number one. Just that word for water means all of that. The second encounter we have with water in Bereisheet is vapor. It's in chapter 2, verses 6 through 9. Now no shrub of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth. In other words, this is before rain. And there was not a man to till the ground. So how are the plants going to survive with no rain and no farmer? So here's the answer. There went up a mist from the earth, and it watered the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So what is this mist that they're talking about? Rashi says, well, you remember those primordial waters that God sort of shoved down underneath the land so that we could have creation? Some of those waters started seeping up. And the reason they started seeping up is the dust was too dry to form man. So he needed something more clay-like to work with to form our bodies. But then to me, the implication is, if part of us comes from that primordial water, there's a part of us that's wild and chaotic and beyond God's control. If this is an explanation of the relationship between humanity and the Creator, that means that sometimes we're a little unpredictable for God. But there are other readings too. Sephorno says, it was blessed dew that dampened the earth and caused sprouting without rain or humans to work the earth. Anyone who's traveled to Israel, and particularly the hot season, knows that dew is still an integral part of Israeli agriculture. It's this soft, cool drops that come during the night that allow plant life to survive in desert climates, even in the heat. So this dew is symbolic of a little bit of grace, which is also a Jewish concept, not just a Christian one. It means the gifts that God gives us, even though we haven't done anything in particular to merit them. So perhaps the relationship expressed in the vapor here in the 2nd chapter of Genesis is that we're all touched a little bit by God's grace. Or maybe the Midrash likes to get a bit sexual with it. He says, what was this vapor? It was a fructifying rain. It's a special rain that only falls in the month of Cheshvan, and it's when it finally rains hard enough to sprout new plant life. It was getting the garden ready for man. So perhaps the reminder is that man is simply another part of creation. We flourish and reproduce like the rest of God's creations, and despite all of our cerebral and spiritual abilities, we're not so different from God's other living creatures. God is king. All of that in the second understanding of water in the Parsha. And here's the third place that water appears. We're told there was a river in chapter 2, verse 10. And a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became 4 branches. Well, the Midrash says originally there was one river in the Garden of Eden, and then man was created and placed in the garden, and one of the tasks God was telling Adam to do was keep my garden well. The primary task of a gardener is to make sure the plants get their water. Now, primordial Adam was like a superhero. He was super smart, he was super beautiful, and he was super strong, according to the Midrash. And so he took his shovel, and he had the ability in the Garden of Eden to just plop it down once, and it split into 4 heads, and those 4 heads of the river irrigated the rest of the garden. That would be the modern-day equivalent of coming into your office and answering 1 email for the day, right? Done. That was how it worked for Adam in the Garden of Eden at first, before he had his conversation with the snake, before he and Eve decided to eat from the fruit of knowledge. So in this image of water that the Midrash is bringing, we're being asked to contemplate the essential nature of man, because Adam had it great in the garden. One blow of his shovel and he could irrigate an entire garden. Apparently that didn't work for him. So what does that say about man? Is it that we can never be content with our lot? Is it that we don't like things simple? Is it that we need to eat from the fruit of knowledge, whatever that may bring us? These are very interesting questions. I understand when the Talmud in Chagiga says you should never question what is above, below, before, and after, because it really can make your head spin. I understand it. But nevertheless, I've sat in classroom after classroom with children who ask these questions. And one of the things that I love about Jewish text is it recognizes that humans will forever be asking these questions, and that it takes a lifetime of wrestling with them and contemplating them and studying all sorts of different things to try to understand that most basic fundamental question that the Parsha is trying to answer: where did this all come from? And I hope that it will be a lifelong journey for you, and if there's something that I can do to try to help you grapple with these essential questions of human nature, please let me know. But for now, I need to go to Tot Shabbat with Slither the snake puppet to tell them the very simplified version of the story in the hopes that it will be the beginning of a long journey of study and contemplation for them. Shabbat Shalom.